Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. It is a very warm day here in Portland, Oregon. We're in zone 9A and I am in North Portland today. I'm in my car, but I'm getting ready to go on a walk in Peninsula Park. I have to be in this part of town today for multiple reasons, and I offered to take Ruth to her chemistry lab and then stay and go for a walk in Peninsula Park, which is really lovely and shady, and there's this big rose garden that smells overwhelmingly fragrant on sunny days. So I like walking there while I listen to my podcast or my audiobook. Okay, so I do want to talk about something gardening related today, even though I am in my car. I forgot my selfie stick or my tripod, and so I have my camera is held up by a pair of tweezers from my first aid kit and my kid's calculator, which she forgot in the car. So hopefully I will get through this video without everything falling apart. Okay, real life. So wanted to talk a little bit about a cautionary tale when it comes to garden design. Now, I get requests all the time from folks either on my Instagram or my Facebook or my YouTube asking if I will do garden consultations for them and if I will do not only the design but installation of their gardens. And I get very overwhelmed with those requests, and I totally understand why folks would make them, and I'm really honored that folks would trust me with their yard on their property where their home is to help them with their garden design and implementation. But there's lots of reasons why that's not my jam and I'm not up for doing that anymore. I used to do that when I was younger, 12, 15 years ago. I did a few complete garden overhauls, renovations for folks. Some were more permaculture-y and some were kind of xeriscaping with natives. So I can't really do that kind of work anymore. I'm 45 and my body just can't, I can't handle it. And especially, the wages that I felt okay charging, it's just, no, it's not worth it for me anymore. But obviously, not everybody can do their own permaculture garden installation themselves. Not everybody has the physical capability or the design skills to want to design and plant out a complex garden scheme in their own yard. And that's great that there are designers who want to help with that, right? That's a niche in the community that I think is good and necessary. However, I think that there are some things to be aware of and look out for. And I keep thinking about filming this video every time I'm in this part of Portland because there is a yard here that I have watched over the last several months as some garden design team has come in and re-landscaped the yard in order to put the house on the market. And they have done every single thing that I would say is a big nope. So when I've redone folks' yards in the past, I have noticed a few consistent issues when folks hire landscaping companies that comes back to bite gardeners in the behind later on. They are often things that are done in order to flip a house, get it ready to go on the market so that it looks really good for a few weeks or a month or two while it's on the market till it sells. Or it's something where it looks really good initially for the homeowner who's going to stay there, but the proper prep wasn't really done. And so the homeowner finds that there are problems that creep up very quickly. And I thought I would share some of those with you all because, again, I know that not everybody wants a garden that looks like mine, but not everybody is really up for the physical labor that is required, and not everybody really has the interest in designing a garden. So here's a couple red flags. The first one is if they use landscape fabric. I have had multiple jobs where I had to rip out landscape fabric, and it is plastic, right? It's basically pre-pollution. It's just plastic that you are laying down as a weed barrier. And then over time, the soil, the roots of the plants, if it's not properly covered, UV, water, frost and thaw cycles, that breaks down that plastic. And so you end up with this kind of shreddy, nasty mess of microplastic pollution that a future homeowner is going to have to basically remediate in order to have their garden. And so I have spent quite a bit of time and energy picking out stringy little either white or black bits, depending on what kind of landscape fabric they used, from various garden beds in redoing folks' gardens. If somebody is using landscape fabric, they want a cheap, quick weed barrier, and they want to have it look good in the short term and not really thinking about the long-term ramifications for the soil, for the garden ecosystem, or for the homeowner. Sorry, I have wet hair. It's being really annoying. So this home that I've been watching in North Portland as they've done this project, they've been using that kind of landscape fabric. And so right away I was like, oh, they're not actually interested in dealing with the weeds that are there. They're not actually interested in a garden ecosystem. They just want something that looks crisp and clean in the short term because weeds are suppressed. Not that there can't be effective weed barriers. I use cardboard, I use burlap as weed barriers, but those are ecological ones that decompose and break down. If you're concerned about using plain corrugated cardboard, I have a whole video on why that is perfectly fine to use in your garden. Actually, I have a series of videos, but start with this one. So the second thing that I saw in redoing folks' yards, and I am seeing in this yard this way, is the landscape designer will come in with a design that looks really good in the short term, and they're thinking about that instant pop of color, that instant pop of like having the form in the garden, and they often purchase large plants, at least gallon pots. And in my experience, the larger the plant, obviously the shorter the time until it's big and fills in a space, but the less likely it is to transplant well, and the more expensive it is. So I've seen, one person that I redid her garden, she showed me the bill for the landscaper that she had previously used, and I was horrified at how much that person had spent on plants using their wholesaler's discount. Absolutely shocked. But everything she put in were 1 and 2 and 3 gallon pots. And that leads me to my next issue, which again, I'm also seeing in this house over here, is very frequently landscapers will come in, and it's often not the designer who is doing the planting, right? They have a team of folks, because those kind of landscape design companies, those kind of redo your yard companies, there's usually like a more affluent white person who runs it, who has a team of laborers that they hire to do the planting. So folks are often brown folks, immigrants, and underpaid, massively underpaid. You could not pay somebody enough to do the kind of backbreaking labor that it takes to redo somebody's yard to the extent that that yard will be successful. It is very expensive. And often I feel like, so I feel like the landscaper who does the designing needs to be more cognizant of the techniques for planting and implementation of the garden plan, and how those can be successful, and what the fair compensation would be for the laborers who have to do the kind of work that is required to have a successful garden plan. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, so there's one garden that I did, and then again, I'm seeing it up here. Basically, they come along and they spray or remove the weeds. And then there is, in a lot of places in Portland, my yard was definitely like this, there's not very much topsoil at all. So what you have is this very dense clay subsoil that's very rocky. We have a lot of like what's called alluvial backfill, right? A lot of river rocks, a lot of glacial rocks that are deposited. So they're very round and tumbly, but there's lots of them, and the soil is hard clay. And so, this one garden that I did, they took their 1 and 2 gallon most expensive plants, and they also put them in when they were blooming, which is stressful in a plant, and you shouldn't do that. Anyway, and they would dig a hole into this compacted subsoil because there was no topsoil, pop out the 1 gallon plant, make no effort to tease out the roots, not soaking it, nothing, and plunk it into that hole. So you have this very kind of like hard pan that the roots of that plant are not going to be breaking out into. There's no making the hole much larger. There's no loosening any of the ground around it. There's definitely no amending any organic matter into that subsoil. And there's definitely putting insufficient organic matter on top. So you're seeing plants that are whole root ball, dense, compact. A lot of plants that you buy from the garden nursery tend to be root bound, and there's no cutting open those roots. There's no thinning them. There's no fluffing them out. There's no soaking. There's no digging a hole that's a sufficient size. There's no amending of that hole. It's just knock it out, plunk it in, scoot some dirt back around it, and then put a scant 1 to 2 inches of bark chips on top. And so you get these plants that are just like deprived of nutrients, who are set up to continue to be root bound because they have this little tiny compact hole where they've been, plunked into. So you're constricting the plant from the get-go. You're not sufficiently amending the soil. So you're creating a situation in which these expensive plants that you've paid so much for, you're kind of dooming them to failure. You're setting them up for hardship from the get-go. So this one garden that I did, I just saw so many of these plants that, she had paid so much money for, just struggling, dying, looking anemic, looking terrible, looking even though she had an in-ground sprinkler system, a lot of these plants were looking very dry and miserable because they were not able to access that water because they were super root bound in this little tiny cage that had been dug for them. So the kind of work that is required to amend the soil to get it in a condition that plants will thrive is a lot of work. And I don't think we compensate our laborers fairly to justify the kind of effort that needs to be done. And also those landscaping companies, they want quick turnover, right? They don't want to do that kind of work. And I think what they're doing is setting the plants up for failure, setting the homeowner up for failure. And as I walk past this house every time that I'm here, I just see these poor little root bound balls of lavender, rosemary, or whatever landscaping plants, Pyrus japonica. Like, you can see they didn't even dig the holes deep enough for the root ball to be completely buried. And so you have this like top 1 to 2 inches of roots just sticking out above the ground because the hole isn't even deep enough, or it doesn't quite fit. And again, people are paying like tens of thousands of dollars for this kind of landscaping, and it blows my mind. And I guess for me, it probably comes back to like, capitalism is going to screw you, right? It's like, how can people squeeze as much blood out of a turnip as possible? How can you maximize your profit? And I'm not trying to like throw shade at all landscapers. I'm just saying, if you're hiring a company and you see their results in a catalog, you need to dig a little deeper and ask, what are the methods that they're using to guarantee long-term success of this garden design? Are they making sure that they are amending the soil sufficiently? Are they breaking up that really, if you've had a yard that's been lawn for decades, it is going to be very compacted from all of that movement over it, from the lawnmower. If you're going in somewhere where, maybe you've had a remodel and now you need to put in a garden, all of that construction traffic and debris is going to be on that yard, compacting it. And you have to be aware that that soil has to be restored to a condition that is conducive to plants doing well in it, right? The third thing that I see is there's also somebody on my evening walk. They have a lovely yard, but boy, oh boy, it's just riddled with weeds because they used gravel as a landscaping material. I love this sunburst. I should probably move my camera, but I think it's so pretty. So let's go with it. I have a video on using gravel. Gravel is a terrible idea. It heats up your garden. It cooks your plants. And it is a terrible, terrible weed barrier. I 100% am not in favor of gravel, except for very specific applications. But in general, as mulch, gravel is a terrible idea. River rock, a terrible idea. So, folks often use it on their planting strip because dogs are on there, people traffic planting strips, and plants tend to struggle. So people think like, oh, I'll just put down rocks. Not realizing that that is rough for the plants that are planted in that condition. Rocks are not a living mulch. Rocks are not a decomposing mulch. They do not impart nutrients to the plants. They do not improve the conditions for those plants unless you are growing some kind of special alpine rock garden. Big red flags for me when any garden designer says, oh, let's just use rocks. They look so neat and tidy. They look neat and tidy, but they are incredibly labor intensive to keep them looking that way. So I don't know. The more I see this kind of stuff around Portland and I see folks paying gobs and gobs of money, I'm thinking like, this is all about very much like house flippers, right? And how like we're working on remodeling our basement. I spent the whole morning sanding my first coat of mudding the drywall seams and then starting the second round of spackling. Just seeing all of the things that were done as cheaply and shoddily as possible by the previous owner because the house was being flipped. And every time I open a wall, I find a disaster, right? That's very much what a lot of the landscape design around Portland feels like to me, is work that is meant to garner a quick profit for a landscaping company, but is setting a homeowner or a future homeowner, if the house is up for sale, setting them up for failure. It's setting the plants in the garden up for failure as well. And so if we're looking at like, what is our goal with garden design? Is it to look really good for just a few weeks while we sell a house? And if so, why would we pay so much money just to have a garden design that will fail for the next owner? I wish we could get away from everything being about turning a quick profit, and think about long-term sustainability and think about, what am I handing to future homeowners? If I'm doing black plastic fabric because it looks really good for the short term while I'm selling the house, what am I burdening future homeowners with down the road? What am I burdening the ecosystem with down the road? Instead of like, just what am I getting out of it here in the short term? So I realized this was like a whole rant, but every time I pass this house, I think about it. And it reminds me of how frustrating it was. Like all of the organic amendments I hauled in, all the back-breaking labor I did, like broad forking and double digging these gardens that had thousands of dollars of plants that absolutely did not need to die if the conditions had been created for their success, like potentially like pretty garden designs, right? But none of the foundation was laid for those gardens to be successful, because that would have meant more labor and more expense. And that's not what the landscapers were about. They're about a quick turnover. And then it ended up costing the homeowner much more in the end to hire me to come and fix it. So I want to say thank you again to folks who reach out and say, like, can you come redo my yard? Can I consult? Are you interested in remaking my yard? I am very flattered that you would consider trusting me with your yard, but it's not something that I'm up for right now. But I do want you to have success if you end up hiring somebody in having a garden that is sustainable and productive and brings you joy and is like a good investment that has a good return. So thanks for listening to me rant today. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe. Please check out, I have a Patreon, I have a Venmo, I have a PayPal, I have a thanks button here on YouTube. I don't put anything behind a paywall, so I rely on ad revenue, which is down quite a bit on this platform and on Facebook, and the generous tips and gifts that y'all give. So I'll be back next time for my permaculture garden in Portland, Oregon. Thanks.